Next up is item number 14, legislative session preparation. And turn the time over to Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, and you want to introduce who else is on your team and what this is all about. It's getting ready for the next legislative session. Seems like it didn't ever end.
Yeah, yes, sir. So we do have the 2020 or 2021 legislative session coming up. In the interest of time, August becomes really our first month where we start to put business cases in front of board members, for potential funding requests. So we're not necessarily asking for, any board approval of the business cases that are provided in the backups. And, where I say that the key question is, are program funding levels aligned to support the strategic plan? You may recall the superintendent saying, we're always interested in funding the plan, fund the plan. Granted, there's circumstances going on right now that make this process apply. This process applies if things were, for lack of a better word, normal, but it's also a process that can be used rather well, I think, for us to address the circumstances. So as Chair Huntsman pointed out, back in March, the end of the legislative session, it happened, we came out of the 2020 session, funding levels were great, and we conducted an after action review. We said, hey, what worked well? What could we do differently? Then, of course, a few weeks later, COVID-19 hit, or, then we went into the soft closure, maybe, a week or so later after the session. So in normal circumstances, but even, under these circumstances, the months of April through July, we focus on the strategic plan. Again, coming out of the session, we're tracking implementation. Deputy Superintendent Stallings has this great tool that we use to, assign the different follow-ups that we need to make to the bills. A lot of times programs require contracts to go into place, and you have a very sound procurement unit, led by Zach. And so, we really focus April through July on those implementation processes. Then, of course, we get into the next fiscal year, and with that, from July through October, we have, a series of board meetings. This one, obviously, we're here now in August. So we start this process, the budget proposal formulation. And in your backups, there's what really governs this or drives this is what's called the Budgetary Procedures Act. So the goal is by the end of your October meeting, you as the board have settled or satisfied what you feel should go forward to the Governor's Office of Managing Budget as a budget proposal in accordance with the Budgetary Procedures Act. So, in past iterations of this, we use business cases for funding up above, what the funding levels are now. We also look internally, we shake the couch cushion, so to speak, look for money. We look for efficiencies. Maybe, we could reduce funding in one program, but look at another. And that's all part of this iterative process that we take with you, that your staff takes with you between July and October. We always follow your direction. Are the business cases in alignment with your strategic plan? And, again, I can't emphasize the fact that we need to make consideration of the circumstances we're in right now. I think there's expectations out there that, what or how can the legislature support us or the governor's office support us with funding to, potentially address learning gaps or, all of the different impacts that have occurred from COVID-19 that maybe the federal dollars, we can't use in a particular manner or aren't sufficient. So, we'll be addressing that in more detail in your September and October meetings. That being, business cases in support of your strategic plan, but then also, really heavy emphasis on the consideration of our current circumstances. So then dropping down to the lower left-hand box, it's, again, the end state or the goal is to finalize your budget proposal at the end of the October board meeting. Then we send that proposal to GOMB. after we come out of that meeting, there's the November and December timeframe. And November and December timeframe is when the Common Data Committee meets. That's where a lot of the determinations are made on estimates, how much growth that we're going to need, and that we'll ask for in the legislative session. So concurrently with your budget proposals, we'll also be providing detailed updates to you in your November and December meetings on what we're looking at as far as Common Data Committee type data. How much growth are we estimating? That's a partnership between the LFA, the governor's office, and our staff. But in addition to that, we get a lot of great input from a lot of statisticians and data, from all sorts of different sources that help us try to determine, what we're looking at as far as growth goes and what we need to ask for in the legislative session. And it's typically when we get to January, as it's the legislative session typically starts the last week or so in January. And that's really when revenue starts to become, more clear. And that's been our process as revenue becomes more clear. And, we've been asked year after year by the legislatures, that's when our prioritization efforts start. They start to ask us, well, given this amount of revenue or, the circumstances, where are your priorities as a board? And then, of course, we start that weekly meeting process and go forward and do great things that we have in previous years. So during the legislative session, of course, we're held accountable. Typically, that's done by, you may recall like Dr. Curry going and briefing on the performance measures. And then, subsequently in all the different committees like Public Education Appropriations and the, Senate Ed and House Ed, we really present a lot of the more detailed aspects of what our requests are as far as funding goes and what we'd like to see, coming out of the 21 legislative session. And then, it's typically about, the second week in February that really revenue is solidified, right? And with that, that's where we really start to see, all the great things that the legislature does with and for public education and your efforts come together as far as, what's available out there and what's necessary to, fund our most precious resources, which are our educators and our students. So really, this is in the interest of time, I had some other higher level details, but I can get into those as we progress together in September and October. There is also in your backups the Budgetary Procedures Act. So what I'd like to do, Chair, is if there's any questions or concerns about the process, we can move to the next item, which is Del Frost presenting, an overview of the tool we're using. It's really a great update to the business cases themselves, but also integrates the statutory changes that staff are requesting. So I'd like him to take, sample and show you just one example of a business case / or absolutely the tool we're using, and also reorient everyone to the tracker. So as we progress together into your September and October meetings, everybody knows and, has at least had some orientation to the tool we're using and also how we're tracking things and providing you the best and greatest information possible for decision-making purposes. But Chair, just before we turn it over to Cal, are there any questions?
I'm looking to see if there's any hands up on this. I'm not seeing it.
Okay.
Deputy Superintendent Jones, before we move to the next one, or to the presentation, would it be good for us to check with the LFAs early? I mean, they know this process, and this process is part of our evolution, and there's an expectation that we're going to continue to follow it and improve it. Because of what's happened this year with the pandemic and that, it might be good for us to check with the LFAs on what their expectations are prior to this session. So as we're spinning the plate, working the process, if we have to make a tweak to it, we can make it early. Or is that an okay request, or maybe you're already talking to them?
Yes, sir. For some reason, I can't find my mute unmute button, so I apologize. Yeah, so we've checked with the LFA, and we're in good synchronization orbit, if you will, with them. As we're all tracking, the circumstances that are going on, the special sessions that are coming up, and as we drill deeper into this in September, as more details come available by way of the next special session and things like that, you'll see just the awesome synergy that we've got with the LFA, but and then also too with UMB, with Jacob Wright. So, sir, we're in a good place. We're in a good spot with them, and we'll be sharing those expectations in more detail when we're, for instance, you mentioned, the board having a meeting prior to the next special session. That's what we'll really show and drill down and show you how focused and how everybody is on that. So
Okay.
I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
I gotta find. Hey, sir, just hang on one sec. I got a technical problem here. I can't find my mute button.
Okay. Well, I think Dell's up. Yeah, so not
Yeah,
seeing any other
if Dell
questions
could
around.
go, and Dell, just kind of orient them to the tracker again, and just orient them to one of the new. You can pick any business case and show them, all the information that's asked for and included in those.
Great, will do. Chair, if I may, Dale Frost, Fiscal Policy Analyst. So I'll go through the business case tracker, the budget tracker first, and then walk you through. And Angie, I think you're driving. If we can go through the competency-based ed grant program business case, that would be a good example because it has both policy changes and budget changes. So on the high-level overview, or I'll give her a moment. So in your backups, there is a document called USBE Fiscal 22 Budget Tracker, August 6, 2020. And I don't know how to turn my video on. I don't know if that matters or not, but okay. So what you have before you is a summary in this tracker document of the 20 or so business cases that have been submitted by staff. And this is, as Scott said, just the very beginning of the process. And there's still a lot of work to be done. During the next month, we're going to be adding business cases in areas of need. We're going to be seeing what happens with the special session. There's likely to be another board meeting. So this is going to be updated before the September meeting. But right now we have 111 million in new requests, and a larger than average percentage of that is in 2021 one-time supplemental requests. And those are largely to restore funding that was reduced by Senate Bill 512, which was in the last special session due to the COVID-19 budget impacts. If you'll see, there's a very short summary. We have also included the 2020 funding levels, if applicable. And you'll see on the right hand of this chart, the alignment with the strategic plan is to be determined because USBE, the superintendency, I believe they were the ones to assign which ones were directly aligned with specific elements of the strategic plan. We haven't yet gone through that process, but I did check those that have elements that restore 2020 general session funding items, and also those that create expanded or new programs. And you'll see that the vast majority of these business cases include some restoration of some of the reductions made in the last special session. So before I go to a business case, any questions about the tracker that I can answer at this time?
I am not seeing any hands up, so please continue.
Okay, great. So Angie, if you can go to the CBE grant program business case.
I just accidentally X'd out of it. I apologize. Give me one more second. When I went to go click on it, I clicked on the X. One moment.
Well, while Angie's bringing that up, so one of the process updates that we made this year was to have a unified policy request, business case request form. And we specifically asked for staff to request for these things in light of the COVID-19 changes. So this is an example of a case that has both policy changes or requests for changes in legislative language, as well as requests for additional resources. So I'm not going to go through in a lot of detail, but if you can scroll down a little bit, you'll see after the points of contact, the first piece that comes up is the policy request. So this identifies what statute it needs to change, why it needs to change, and what are the changes. In this case, they're primarily we're looking for an update to the definition of competency-based ed to a more current modernized definition that reflects the field, which I believe is personalized and competency-based learning. So that's the statutory change. If you're clicking through and look and you don't see this page in the business cases, many of them do not have it. It's because there's not a requested change to statute. It's just an increase in the funding. So if you can go down, Angie, to the business case part. So this is the money end of it. And we asked staff to identify, are you asking to restore funding that came out of the 2020 general session? If so, how much? And you'll see a portion of that request, I think there's 300,000 requested, 230,000 of which is to restore funding that was reduced. And then if you continue down, there is a request for additional funding above and beyond that, but that's further out. So there's actually 70,000 in the request for fiscal 22, and then they need funding in 23 just as an update. And then the pages after the numbers are really the explanation and the backup as to why this funding is needed, what it will be used for, and what are the expected outcomes if this funding is provided. So hopefully that can give you an idea of what the process is going forward. Again, we have 20 or so cases, but there are many more to come. And this is just the beginning of the process. So I'd be happy to answer any additional questions.
Hey, questions from board members? We've seen this before, and it's good to have this refresher. I'm not seeing any hands raised. So thank you. Thank you, Scott. Do you have anything else to add?
No, so I just respectfully request that, so between now and the next meeting, in addition to the business cases you see that were submitted by staff, we'll start reaching out to the field. For example, we'll engage with Superintendent Cunningham, with BAs, to get input for districts. I also engage with, charter school representatives to get input from them if they, so if they see fit that they want to make a business case proposal. Board members are always welcome to, refer individuals that ask them questions about this process to me. I can always try and answer questions. So the September meeting, I anticipate we'll need a little bit more time because, there will be quite a bit of the business cases to start really going down into, and, a process that will, start to your point, Chair, given, input from the LFA, that coordinating effort, if you will, to land on, what to expect, in the legislative session, what expectations are as far as funding requests. In addition to, the year-end close carry forward balances and the money that we have on hand right now to again, place in the most strategic way to support the strategic plan, but support educators and students always. So, sir, with that concludes this agenda item.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Jones.
May I ask a question before we conclude?
Yes, I'll look for, okay, I didn't see your hand. What, oh, there it is, Janet. Board
Thank
Member
you.
Cannon.
Thank you. I took some time and read through all of the business cases, and I'm persuaded with how I'd like to see them get this money. But the reality of what might be available seems prohibitive to me. So I'm wondering, Scott, if you could make a comment on what the forecasts are for any kind of monies to address a lot of these things or restore funding might be as we move forward.
Deputy Superintendent Jones? Fair, we can certainly do that. Yeah, that's great. That's our plan. We'll be as forthcoming with that information as possible, because we understand not just Board Member Cannon, but all board members need that information to make a decision.
I think your question was, do you see anything in the forecast or review?
Do you have any information now?
No, okay, I'm sorry. I do know that what I've got is just some initial input from the income tax filings. The estimates were not as bad as was thought. Income tax revenue is still down. There was some increase in the sales tax, but again, sales tax funds the general fund typically, and then some increases in transportation as well. So I would anticipate that as we draw closer to the next to the next special session, that we'll really have those numbers firmed up and, know, going into the special session, what the effects of that are. So, more to follow. I couldn't say to all the board members that, there might not be changes to state fiscal year 21 budget. But we'll just have to see where we finally land on the revenue, from the 2019 income tax filings. Because again, as that were put off till July 15th, so I'm sure they're going through all that right now. So more to follow on that. And then revenue for from 2020, doesn't really become available to us till later in the year. So as I put on the slide, till we get into the fall in the winter type months, or into the legislative session. So, right now, we're just still waiting for finalization of what the final numbers are from the income tax filings for July. So,
Thank you, Scott.
Thank
you, Scott. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands up. Deputy Superintendent Jones. So should we move to the next item?
Yes, Chair, would you like me to move forward?
Yes,
This is
yeah,
Angie
I think we
Stallings.
got through 14.1, 14.2. So Deputy Superintendent Angie Stallings, you're on 14.3.
Yes, thank you. So as you just heard a moment ago, as you're listening to business cases, you're going to see some of the policy requests that will be presented a little differently, because we do have some policy requests that do not have funding impacts, but you'll also see some duplication, and we're trying to be better about that this year and tracking where a business case might trigger a policy change need, or vice versa, where there's a policy request or change to statute that ends up triggering a fiscal impact. So you can see today we've got 4 here for you. I'll actually start at the bottom, because you just heard a summary of the number 4, which is a request to update sections of code related to the competency-based education grant program. What staff would like to do is rename or rebrand that the Personalized Competency-Based Learning Grant Program, and make some other changes to the statutory provisions related to that program, and also align those with changes we've made or are planning to make in board rules. So that's number 4. I'll just go from the bottom top. Number 3 is to provide flexibility to update the professional learning standards as they shift, and removing some language that's in code that is outdated or is constraining or not providing enough flexibility, and also defining high quality professional learning in board rule. Next is number 2, which would be including a new requirement for graduates to complete the FAFSA before they graduate. Utah is second to last in the nation regarding FAFSA completion, and FAFSA completion has been linked to increased graduation rates and increased college going rates. And then last, which is actually first, is seeking some statutory changes to align for the School Children's Trust section and program to align dates and processes and code with the new programming that's been taking place. Some of you may know that prior to recently, the School Children's Trust section used an outside of USBE system. We've been now incorporating their program into our internal USBE systems. And so they have found that we need to make some changes to section 53G7 1206. And that's it. Those are the summary of the 4 policy changes that staff would like to work on for the 2021 general session.
Okay, questions from board members? Board member Earl?
So let me just ask questions on number 2, because I have concerns with this. So if a child completes everything to graduate but hasn't filled out a FAFSA, then we're not going to allow them to graduate? Is that when we make it a requirement? Anyways, that's one. I just have a question on that, which it just seems like that's just not good practice for that. And then I would like some data gathered on that item specifically, because we have there's a correlation between going to college if you fill out your FAFSA and actually completing college, or the amount of debt that is acquired, because financial aid is not just grant aid, it's also loan. I'm just saying is if this gets moved on, and I'm not sure if it will or not, but I would like additional information on that. And then where Utah is one of the lowest for completeness, actually it's the lowest, I think we need to take into consideration as to why that is, or look into why. We've got a number of youth that leave on LDS missions within that 6-month time frame. And so I would like to know what impact that plays on those two. So that's just a variety of things. I have concerns about that requirement instead of the encouragement or the helping or assisting people in filling out the FAFSA versus requiring it. Thank you.
Do you have a comment, Deputy Superintendent Stallings?
I would defer to either Director Jennifer Thronson or potentially Deputy Norman if they have. You asked some good questions that honestly I don't have the background on. Nate Ock is the person in our office who made this request. Jennifer, are you available to answer?
I'm looking for a hand to be raised if they're still on. Jennifer, are you available? Jennifer Thronston?
Or maybe Darren or Patty?
Chair, this is Deputy Superintendent Patty Norman. I don't have the information for that, but we can get that back to you as soon as possible, possibly putting it in the chat or getting it back as soon as possible.
Thanks. I can put the questions in there.
Okay, thank you. Board member Scott Nielsen, your hand's raised.
Yeah, I have some of the very same concerns that Jenny had that I just want to reiterate, because if we're going to, it seems to me that is a requirement to fill out FAFSA. I am very much opposed to tying that, requirement for graduation. I'm very much opposed tying to our graduation requirements being something that students actually fill out. I mean, I understand that, it may be important, kids want to, I'm also very, borrowing money to go to school may or very much may not be the way to go, but I do not want us to have to require students to fill out FAFSA in order to be able to graduate high school. One in my mind has nothing to do with the other. So I definitely want more information on this.
Thank you. Board member Gravitt.
Yeah, I just want to speak to that. And it comes from personal experience. And I understand what people are saying about, the struggle with requiring, but in my experience, the requirement for FAFSA would help so many students. I see students in my area who, that's the reason they don't go to school, is because they didn't fill it out. But if it were a requirement, that would get so many of our students, especially those who might be a little more disenfranchised or marginalized, it would get them into college. And so I think this is an excellent thing to pursue. And I think the requirement would far outweigh any hesitation in terms of benefits. So thank you, staff, for putting this together.
Got your hand still up?
I'll lower, yeah, no, I just disagree with that, but I'll lower my hand. Don't worry.
Okay. So what this requires, as we're working through a bunch of these potential items, is anyone wanting to make a motion on the request for statutory changes? Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion. I got to the proposed motion that we ask staff to work with legislators for the following statutory changes on items 1, 3, and 4.
There's second?
This board member Earl, I'll second that.
Okay. Want to speak to the motion, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins?
I just want to speak to why I left off number 2. I think if there's one thing we've learned in this pandemic is that the more requirements we have, the more time we have to spend waiving those in difficult situations. I think it's an unnecessary requirement. I do agree that there's benefit for students filling out the FAFSA, and I think that we can really push those things through different programs that we have, but to create a requirement might actually be counterproductive. As we look for students to get to college, they have to graduate, and if we put kind of an arbitrary requirement on, I think it could cause some problems. So I'm not going to support this at this time. So.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any other hands up. The proposed motion is that board authorize staff to work with the legislators on potential amendments to Utah Code on items 1, 3, and 4. Not seeing any hands, so let's vote on this. All in favor, say aye. Or not aye, sorry.
Aye.
Please vote. Sorry.
Mark, Scott, this is Scott.
I want to get to that in-person meetings here pretty soon. So
Yeah, that'd be
please
nice.
vote.
Mark, this is Scott Nielsen. I'm an aye.
Yeah, okay, we've got that. Thank you. Voting is complete and the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Chair.
I'm not seeing any other hands up or questions, so thank you, Deputy Superintendent Stallings. And I know this isn't the last we're going to hear of you because you are the driver. You've been referred to as the driver. Keep all of this together. So thank you for your work, and you're wearing many hats here this afternoon. Okay.